6 words, no greeting, no punctuation. Don't come in. Lindsay doesn't want you here. The text hit me like a quiet car crash. I had just pulled into the driveway. Casserole still warm beside me. Rosemary clipped fresh from my garden that morning. The kind of dish you make when you're told you're still family. Inside the house, I could see them. Through the window, laughing, passing plates, clinking wine glasses, their lives moving in rhythm without me. I didn't knock. I didn't reply. I just stood there, a man holding a meal nobody wanted, on the doorstep of the house I paid for. And you won't believe what happened next. My name is Walter Hayes. I'm 68, retired Navy, widower. I live alone in Charleston, South Carolina. People say I'm quiet, but that's not the same as weak. I've survived storms, battles, losing my wife, Joan, but nothing prepares you for being erased while you're still alive. So I stood there. On gravel I once laid myself, watching a family dinner I funded, a life I gave them. They thought that was the end of the story. It wasn't. Before we go any further, make sure to like this video and subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. Now, let's go back to the beginning. That morning, I got up early, pressed a clean shirt, packed the casserole carefully, still steaming. I thought about Joan. She used to say, "Don't rush a dish that's supposed to comfort." I smiled, remembering her apron still hanging behind my kitchen door. I was proud of that meal, of showing up. That's what fathers do. But that text, it rewrote everything I believed about family. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. What I felt was quieter, like the soft click of a lock on a door I didn't know existed. The sky was turning that deep Carolina blue when the sun starts to fold. I walked back to my truck, the gravel not even crunching under my feet as if even the ground had learned not to acknowledge me. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, hands on the wheel, watching the warmth from the casserole fade, just like my place in their lives. Same flickering porch light, same crooked swing. I walked into silence. Joan used to call this our pause button. Now it felt like the last unread chapter of a book no one finished. I placed the dish on the counter, didn't bother refrigerating it. I wasn't hungry, I wasn't angry, I was aware. For the first time in years, I truly saw my life for what it had become. Then I went to my study, opened the top drawer. A folder sat inside. Worn, thick, labeled Granger Family Financial Support. Yes, my last name used to be Granger. I changed it back to Hayes after Joan passed. But we'll get to that later. Page 1, $220,000 down payment for their house. Page 3, $8,000 for Lindsay's dental work. Page 7, $14,000 for Rebecca's violin camp. Page 15, $4,800 for a swing set I helped install while Nathan stood scrolling his phone. Line after line, year after year. They didn't ask. They just implied. And I always showed up, because I thought showing up was the same as being loved. Sleep wasn't coming. I opened a leather-bound journal I hadn't touched in months. On the first blank page, I wrote, "There's a moment when love becomes a transaction. Most people don't notice until the bill arrives." And just like that, I saw it. Every dollar I gave was never charity. It was rent. Rent for a seat at a table they'd long since pulled away from me. I thought of Joan again. She'd probably pour me tea, sit across the table, and say, "Don't let them spend your silence. Walter, that's all you have left." That night, I didn't cry, didn't curse. I simply sat still, And in that stillness, I decided. No confrontation, no drama, just quiet, legal, permanent. Because dignity doesn't scream. It signs documents. You see, people don't get erased all at once. It happens slowly, quietly, a little less warmth in a greeting, one fewer phone call on your birthday, a shift in tone you try to ignore. Until one day, you're just not part of the picture anymore. Your background. That night, after I'd written those words in my journal, there's a moment when love becomes a transaction. I stayed up, just thinking, replaying every request, every vague emergency, every moment I was expected to say yes. I opened the folder again, not because I wanted to relive it, but because I needed to understand the truth I'd ignored. It wasn't just the house. Page after page. A $220 $1,000, the down payment for the house. I liquidated part of my pension and Joan's life insurance to cover it. They promised to add me to the deed once they settled in. They never did. It was $8,000 cosmetic dental surgery for Lindsay. Not an emergency. Not even asked directly. She just let it hang in the air during dinner one night, and I volunteered, like I always did. And $14,000 violin camp for Rebecca, the only expense I never questioned. Because unlike the others, she always said thank you and meant it. And $4,800 for that backyard swing set. They said it was for the kids, to avoid the drive to the park. I remember being on my knees in the gravel, sunburned, while Nathan leaned in the shade and muttered, "Looking good, Dad." There were more. Health insurance premiums, grocery deliveries, gas bills, a dog groomer I'd never met for a golden retriever I'd never seen. And then there was the $1.200 dinner for Lindsay's mother's birthday, a vineyard 2 counties over. They invited her family, her colleagues, even her yoga instructor. Not me, but I got the bill. The realization hit me like a cold draft in my own home. They weren't malicious. That would have been easier to confront. No, this was worse. It was systemic. They had learned to expect me like electricity, like Wi-Fi. Necessary, silent, and only noticed when I stopped working. And I let them. I'd raised my son to believe that support meant showing up. That's on me. But I hadn't raised him to believe that support had no limits. That part, Lindsay taught him. 174 transactions. I found that number after requesting a full audit from the bank. Every monthly deduction, every automatic draft, every shared authorization they'd linked to my accounts. $14.99 for an app, $3,800 for the mortgage, $300 for roof repairs, even $79.99 for a meal kit subscription, Lindsay said made her week less stressful. The teller didn't ask questions. She just printed the list and slipped it into a blue envelope. I carried it home like a letter from the past. A letter from a man I used to be. I spread every page out across my kitchen table. And I read them, not like a father, not like a victim, like a detective. Patterns emerged. The payments didn't stop when I got sick 3 winters ago. They didn't stop when I missed Thanksgiving 2 years in a row. They didn't even pause after Joan's anniversary passed without so much as a call. They had stopped seeing me, but they never stopped seeing the money. That was the real betrayal, not exclusion. Extraction. I wasn't a father anymore. I was infrastructure. And if you know anything about infrastructure, you know this people only notice it when it collapses. That evening, I called James Tate, my attorney, my friend, a man I hadn't spoken to in over a year. "James," I said, "it's time." There was a pause. Then he replied, "Calm as ever. You finally drawing a line, Walter?" I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. "No," I said, "I'm moving the whole damn fence." Nathan called that night. First time in weeks. I didn't answer. The screen lit up on the kitchen counter. Nathan Hayes calling. The same hand that once clutched mine crossing the street. Now he only reached out when something failed. A voicemail came through. I didn't listen. I didn't need to. I knew the tone. I knew the rhythm. Hey, Dad. Look, it was just a bad night. Lindsay was tired. It wasn't personal. But that's the thing. It was never personal. It was routine. I opened my journal again, wrote one line. They said I was family, until family meant showing up when it wasn't convenient. I thought of all the small signs I'd dismissed. The way Nathan stopped calling me Dad and started saying, "Hey, man." The way Lindsay's smile froze every time I offered parenting advice. The way holidays became texts. Then nothing. I used to think it was just life, just generational drift. But it wasn't. It was erosion, slow, relentless, until the foundation was hollowed out and no one noticed until it cracked. And I kept mistaking being needed for being loved. But I finally saw it for what it was. This wasn't about money. It was about control. They didn't want a relationship. They wanted a resource. And I was done being a line item in someone else's spreadsheet of comfort. What I did next wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was legal and permanent. The moment I walked into the bank and changed everything, they didn't see it coming. But they were about to feel it. Like, comment, and subscribe if you've ever been taken for granted. Don't miss what happens next. I woke up the next morning before the sun cracked over the oak in my backyard. There's a kind of silence that only comes after a decision's been made quiet. But not peaceful, heavy, but focused. I didn't eat breakfast, just shaved, put on a pressed shirt, and drove to the same bank I'd used for 23 years. The woman at the counter, Marie, recognized me. She asked how the grandkids were doing. "They're growing fast," I said, and smiled. But that wasn't why I was there. I asked to speak with the senior officer. In a small glass room, I laid it out. Every account where Nathan had power of attorney, every automatic payment connected to their household, every shared authorization, every linked transaction. "I'd like to revoke all of this," I said calmly. "Effective immediately." Marie blinked. "Is everything all right, Mr. Hayes?" I looked her dead in the eye and said the most honest sentence I'd spoken in years. "Everything's finally clear." That afternoon, I sat on my porch with the casserole dish still on the counter behind me. Untouched. Cold now. The rosemary inside had dried out at the edges. I thought about throwing it away, but that felt too easy, too much like letting the evidence disappear. So I left it there. A symbol. The meal I made for people who no longer saw me as part of the table. And in that quiet, I didn't feel bitter. I felt sure. Back inside, I opened the folder again. Not because I needed more proof, but because the pain had changed shape. Some people revisit old voicemails. Others scroll through photos. Me, I had line items. $12,000 for Lindsay's online certification course, some holistic parenting program I still can't pronounce. $1 or $300 for emergency roof repair. I remembered that call. Lindsay's voice had cracked, just enough. "Toby can't sleep. There's water in his room. We're scared." I paid the contractor directly. Didn't question it. Didn't even ask for an estimate. Because when your child says they're scared, you show up. That's the rule. Right? But now I realized I wasn't helping. I was enabling. More pages, more numbers. Preschool fees. Holiday flights. A subscription to an organic meal service. A payment to a dog groomer for a golden retriever I'd still never seen. The most insulting. A $1, $200 dinner at a vineyard, hosted for Lindsay's mother, her family, her colleagues, her yoga instructor. I wasn't invited, but I paid the bill. There was a rhythm to it all, a manipulation I hadn't wanted to see. They never asked. Not directly. They just said things like, "It's been a tight month," or "We're stretched thinner than usual." And I, like a trained reflex, opened my wallet. Because fathers don't keep score, right? Wrong. They don't keep score until they realize someone else has been keeping it for them. I flipped to the final pages. There it was, the house deed. Signed 6 years ago. My name as sole owner. They'd told me we'd update it later. Add Nathan once they got things settled. We never did. And I never pushed. Because I thought love would take care of it. I thought gratitude would close the loop. But gratitude never came. Only expectation. Later that evening, another text came in. Mortgage didn't go through. You switch banks. Short. Cold. No dad. No mention of the night I stood outside with a warm dish while they poured wine inside. No apology. Just an alert that something stopped working. Like I was their IT department, their emergency line, their backup plan. But here's the thing. I wasn't broken. I was done. I called James again. We met the next day. Same office, same coffee, same quiet professionalism. I slid the folder across the table. These are all the payments I've made over the last 6 years. James flipped through. He didn't say much, just nodded slowly. This isn't support anymore, I said. It's payroll. He smirked, but not because it was funny. Because it was true. Then I pulled out the deed. The one that still had my name. Sole owner? No trust, no secondary, no clause. James looked up. So, you never gifted the house. I shook my head. They always said we'd fix it later, but I stopped reminding them. He leaned back, arms crossed. And now, I said, I want to take it back. We began the paperwork. Revoking Nathan's power of attorney. Suspending all outgoing transfers. Updating my will. Initiating the legal process to reclaim full control. No confrontation, no drama, just signatures. And certainty. Because dignity doesn't shout. It signs. That night, Nathan called again, then texted, then emailed. None of it said what I needed to hear. No remorse, no accountability, just disruption, inconvenience. Because that's what happens when you stop being a person and start being a system. And when the system goes quiet, the users panic. In my journal, I wrote, every time I stayed silent, I co-signed my own erasure. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was restoration. I made one final plan. Not to hurt them, but to free myself. Some people imagine breaking points as explosions, yelling, slamming doors, fists on tables. Mine was quieter. A slow sip of black coffee. The whisper of a page turning in a folder too thick with sacrifice. The click of a pen as I signed my name one more time this time. For myself. I didn't want revenge. I wanted reclamation. Not just of money or property, but of something deeper. Presence, peace, and the right to no longer apologize for my silence. The next morning, I went back to the bank. This time, not to cancel anything, but to get a full map of what was still tethered to me. Every active payment, every account with joint access, every automatic renewal I had long stopped noticing. The teller didn't ask why. She just printed out a 19-page summary and slipped it into a stiff blue folder. 174 transactions. Some were small $12.99s here, $34.50 there. Others were massive $3,800. Mortgage, $900 for private school, $220 for the landscaper who trimmed hedges I'd never seen. I carried it home like a dossier from a case I had just decided to prosecute. And I laid them all out, page after page. A testimony to how invisible I had become. Not to the world, to my own son. I sat at the kitchen table, reading it like evidence. What stood out wasn't the dollar signs. It was the consistency. The unwavering, machine-like regularity with which they drew from me whether I was sick, grieving, or just not invited. Not even Joan's memorial stopped the drafts. Not even 2 Thanksgivings alone. I stared at the documents and felt something settle in my chest. Not rage. Conviction. They hadn't called in months, but their bills still remembered me. They'd erased me from their gatherings, but not from their grocery deliveries. That night, I called James again. "Let's finish this," I told him. He didn't need clarification. He simply replied, "Come in tomorrow." So I gathered it all. Invoices, receipts, insurance notices, subscription renewals, gas bills, every email confirming my involvement in their lives financially, but never emotionally. I organized them by category. Not for drama, not for confrontation. For clarity, this wasn't a war. It was a resignation from a contract I never signed as socia, but had upheld for far too long. The next day, I met James again. He slid a stack of fresh documents across the desk. New will, updated estate plan, termination letters. I signed each page deliberately, as if every stroke of the pen was unfastening another weight from my chest. "Right now," he said, flipping to the original documents, "Nathan is your primary beneficiary." I nodded. "Not anymore," I said. I created a living trust, one that left nothing to Nathan, nothing to Lindsay. Rebecca, she'd still receive something, not because she expected it, but because she'd earned it. She saw me. She knocked on the door no one else even looked at. The rest of my assets, a scholarship fund in Joan's name. For the overlooked, the ones no one claps for, the second chancers. James didn't comment, but his eyes said enough. Approval. Maybe even respect. Then he asked the question that had been waiting in the room the whole time. "What changed, Walter?" I took a breath, and I told him. Not a speech, just the truth. "They stopped seeing me," I said, "and I finally started seeing myself." He nodded once, quietly. We finished the paperwork. He notarized the will, stored copies. And just like that, I had taken my life off autopilot. Not loud, not angry, just awake. That afternoon, I visited the house. Not to go in. I didn't have a key. I hadn't been invited. I just stood at the edge of the driveway, the same one I'd paid to repave, and looked. The shutters I installed. The porch swing I bought when Toby broke his arm. The bay window where Rebecca once practiced violin while I clapped from the steps. I took a photo, framed, documented. Because sometimes you don't need confrontation. You just need proof. Back home, I drafted the next move. An email to James. Subject: next steps. Because the first half of this story was about them. But this next half, it was mine. 2 days later, I received a certified letter. Toby's birthday was coming up. A dinner invitation. Handwritten, probably by Lindsay. No apology. No mention of the night on the porch. No acknowledgement of the casserole. Just, "We'd love to have you. The kids would be thrilled." I read it once. Set it down. I didn't RSV. I didn't go. Because invitations without reckoning aren't olive branches. They're placeholders, meant to reset the clock while ignoring the time already lost. That night, I wrote in my journal, "When you take back what was always yours, don't explain it. They already know why. They thought I wouldn't go that far. They assumed the worst I'd do was pull the plug on a few payments, maybe ignore a birthday dinner. What they didn't know, what they never cared to ask, was that the house they lived in, laughed in, hosted holidays in, still belonged to me. Not sentimentally, not emotionally. Legally. The title was clear. James had reviewed it thoroughly. No transfers, no co-owners, no trust agreements, no fine print. My name was still the only one that mattered. And for the first time in years, I wanted that to mean something again. I wasn't looking to kick them out. Not at first. What I wanted was alignment. If I wasn't welcome in the home I paid for, then they weren't entitled to build comfort on top of my silence. So I reached out to a real estate attorney, quietly, professionally. I requested a title review and paperwork to reclaim residential control. Not eviction, just intention. The first signs of panic came within the week. Nathan called, twice, left voicemails that tiptoed between confusion and desperation. Hey, Dad. The mortgage portal is glitching. Did you change something? I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I wasn't the landlord of their peace anymore. Then came the email from Lindsay. Kurt, polished, performed. Walter, there seems to be a delay in the automatic transfers for the kids' school and household expenses. Can you please look into this? No, hi, Dad. No hope you're doing well. Just a polite complaint. A service ticket. I closed the message. Didn't answer. Went outside and trimmed my rosemary bush. They were used to me responding like clockwork. This time, I let them feel the absence. That Saturday, I drove by the house again. Not to visit, just to see. The car was gone. The porch was clean, no toys in the yard, no sound from the bay window where Rebecca used to play violin. I took another photo, not for nostalgia, for documentation, because sometimes silence needs backup. On Monday, James filed the necessary motions. All payments terminated, all permissions revoked, power of attorney rescinded, ownership reaffirmed. Still, I hadn't spoken a word to them. That was the beauty of it. It was clean, it was lawful, it was silent. Silence, when used right, isn't distance, it's power. 2 days later, a delivery arrived at my door. A small envelope, hand-delivered at 6 p.m. Inside, an invitation to Toby's birthday dinner. Handwritten again, likely Lindsay. The kids would love to see you. There was no apology, no mention of what had already begun. Just a performance, a reset button disguised as an invitation. I didn't RSVP, because gestures without reckoning aren't reconciliation. They're decoration. Instead, that night, I sat by the fire, opened my journal, and I wrote. They say silence is passive, but silence with intention is its own kind of justice. 3 weeks passed. The calls slowed, the emails dried up. Then came a letter, from Rebecca. 3 handwritten pages. Grandpa, I don't know everything that's going on, but I know something broke, and I want you to know I see it. I see you. If you ever want to talk, not to fix it, just to talk, I'm here. She didn't take sides. She didn't sugarcoat it. She just showed up. And in that letter, I remembered what it felt like to be seen again. 2 days later, I sent a package. Not to her, to Nathan and Lindsay. An overnight courier, signature required. Inside 3 sheets of paper, titled clearly, Notice of intent to list property for sale. No threats, no insults, no explanation. Just facts, just law, just me taking back what had always been mine. The reactions came fast, like clockwork. An email from Nathan, long, defensive, full of phrases like, surely there's been a misunderstanding. This could devastate the kids. No mention of the casserole night. No mention of the text that started it all. Just panic. Because suddenly, the man they'd forgotten had a voice. The next day, Nathan called, voice cracking. Dad, please, don't do this. But we'd already talked. Not with words, with decisions. With the click of locks I had rekeyed. With the folders I had filed. With the silence they thought was submission. But it was preparation. Lindsay followed up with a printed letter. Walter, I understand you're upset. Think of the kids. Think of Rebecca. Think of the holidays. She always did that. Weaponized sentiment. Used the kids as emotional currency. But I had thought of the kids. I'd thought of them when I stood outside that window with a warm dish and no place at the table. 2 days later, I scheduled a walkthrough with a realtor. 3:00 p.m., Tuesday. I wore a navy sweater, clean khakis, polished shoes. I looked like a stranger visiting someone else's house. The realtor was young, polite, a little confused. They're still living here, he asked. I nodded. Not for long. Room by room, he took photos. The living room, the kitchen island I custom built, the master bedroom with the fan I installed. It was all mine. Used, but never honored. We finished the tour in silence. I signed the initial paperwork on the hood of his car. The pen barely shook in my hand. Listing goes live in 2 weeks, I told him. Enough time not for them to change my mind, but to remember why this was happening. That night, I opened Joan's old photo album. There we were, standing in front of the same house 25 years ago, holding baby Nathan. A sold sign behind us. Smiles full of hope. She once told me, kindness is not the same as allowing disrespect. Know the line. Don't apologize for it. The listing goes public. The fallout begins. But something unexpected happens. Not from Nathan. From Rebecca. And from a boy named Toby. The listing went live on a Friday morning. By noon, there were 3 offers. All cash. No contingencies. Above asking. The market was hot, but I wasn't selling for profit. This wasn't business. This was punctuation. The full stop after a sentence I never agreed to write. That night, I received a text from Nathan. Dad, please. Can we talk before this goes any further? I didn't reply. He wasn't reaching out to reconcile. He was trying to halt a process he had long assumed I was too tired or too soft to ever begin. Ever. But I wasn't either of those things anymore. I was awake. On Sunday afternoon, Nathan showed up at my front door. No call, no warning. Just him, standing there, coat half-zipped, eyes full of questions he didn't know how to ask. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He looked at me, jaw tight. Then he said, Dad, what did I do that was so unforgivable? I didn't flinch. It wasn't one thing. I said, it was all the things you thought I'd never notice. He looked down. You treated my silence like approval. You treated my help like obligation. And you treated my love like background noise. He didn't argue. He just stood there. And I didn't need him to stay. Because for the first time, he had no defense. And I had no room left to carry both his weight and mine. I stepped back and closed the door behind me. Quietly. Finally. That week, they tried to bargain. Offered to pay rent, asked for time. But rent requires an agreement, and we no longer agreed on what family meant. So the final notice was served, 30 days. Not an eviction, just the end of a generosity that had become a leash. On the morning the sign was hammered into the front lawn, Rebecca called. She didn't sound angry, just hurt. Is it really happening? She asked. I told her yes. Not with anger, but necessity. You don't rip out a fire alarm because the sound bothers you. I said, you check the wiring. And if it's faulty, you fix the source. She went quiet. Then she asked something simple. Can we have dinner, just you and me? I said yes, because she knocked. Because she still saw me not as an account number, but as someone whose voice mattered. She brought lemon meringue pie. Joan's favorite. She didn't ask about the sale, didn't interrogate the silence. She just sat with me on the porch swing, her head tilted toward the breeze like she remembered being rocked there as a child. We talked about books, about her classes, about how she missed the smell of rosemary and charcoal on my old grill. And then she said something I hadn't expected. They talk about you like you were a utility that broke. She paused. But I remember you being the one who fixed things, quietly, steadily. That night, I gave her Joan's old recipe book, the handwritten one, pages smudged with time, notes in the margins from 25 years of meals and memories. She held it like it was an heirloom. Because it was. A few days later, I got a letter from Toby, scrawled in wide, uncertain handwriting. Grandpa, I miss you. Mom and Dad don't talk to you, but I remember your stories. And your grilled cheese. I hope we can do those again. I read it 3 times. Then I wrote him back. Not a lecture. Not an explanation. Just a story about a turtle I once found in the backyard. And a note I saved a grilled cheese. Just in case. Because children shouldn't carry the weight of things they didn't break. And sometimes a sandwich is a promise. That evening, Nathan sent another email. No subject line, no greeting, Just I saw what you left. He meant the photo. The old family photo I'd left on the kitchen counter during the walkthrough. Joan. Me. Him age 7. Front tooth missing. Clip-on tie crooked. He didn't ask why I left it. He already knew. Försumste. A few days later, Rebecca came by again. This time, she didn't bring pie. She brought a question. Can I take the swing? I smiled, of course. She didn't mean the actual swing. She meant the right to remember. The right to take a piece of something steady with her. The night before the final walkthrough, I sat by the fire and opened Joan's old journal. She once wrote, "A man cannot make others cherish what they never built, but he can choose not to be buried under their carelessness." I closed the book and placed it between the photo albums and my estate papers. Everything was ready. On the final morning, Nathan showed up again. This time, with Toby. They didn't come to argue. They didn't come to plead. They just came. I showed Toby the garden, told him how Joan used to name the roses like pets. He laughed. Said he liked the yellow ones best. Said they looked like the sun got stuck in the leaves. Nathan stayed behind on the porch, watching. And when Toby went inside, Nathan finally spoke. "You changed." I shook my head. "No, I stopped hiding the parts of me that hurt." He swallowed hard. "You always seemed like you didn't need anyone." I looked at him carefully. "I needed you to believe in something besides your noise." He didn't argue. He just nodded. For the first time, he saw what I had been trying to give him all these years. Not money, not safety, but a standard. Before they left, I handed Nathan an envelope. Inside a photo of him at age 10, holding a kite, laughing. Joan's handwriting on the back. "This is who he is. Remind him when he forgets." He held it for a long time, didn't speak. But when he finally looked up, he said, "Thank you." And this time, it wasn't for money, or groceries, or school fees. It was for something real, the final signature, the last memory, and what legacy actually looks like when it's passed to the ones who can carry it. The closing papers were signed on a gray Tuesday afternoon. The couple buying the house was young teachers, newly married. They walked through it like it was sacred ground, whispered, touched walls gently, smiled like they understood. I left the photo on the kitchen counter, the one of Nathan, 7 years old, gap-toothed and wide-eyed, between Joan and me. They asked if I'd forgotten it. I said, "No, it belongs there for now. Because sometimes, what you leave behind isn't a mistake. It's a message." Back home, my cottage felt smaller, but honest. Every drawer had a purpose. Every creak in the floorboard knew my name. I made a cup of coffee, black as always, and sat at the window. The wind was light. The rosemary bush danced just slightly, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a relic. I felt present. That weekend, Toby visited. No fanfare, just a knock on the door and a sketchbook in hand. We made grilled cheese. He asked about turtles. I told him one of my old stories. He laughed so hard he nearly fell off the porch swing. Rebecca came by later. We didn't talk about the house. We just sat. 3 people. 3 generations. Not fixing anything. Just being. I didn't rewrite the will again. I didn't need to. Because what mattered now wasn't what I left behind. It was who stayed. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what have you walked away from, so you could finally return to yourself? Thanks for listening. This is what remains.